So now the goal is to output the actual question data, the actual question text, and its answers on this screen. Now for that, we of course got our questions list here in this questions Dart file. But how do we now output the texts and the answers for these different questions in this questions screen widget now? Well, we can start by importing the questions into this file. That's a good start because that at least allows us to use this list in this file. So for this, we can add an import here where we import from our own project, and they are from the data folder and they are from the questions Dart file. And with this import added, we can access this questions list here. Now we just need to access the different elements in that questions list. And therefore, it's important to understand how you can access list values in Dart. And for that, let's take a simple example, a list of hobbies, a list of strings, therefore. And let's say in some place of your code, you want to access the first element in this list, so cooking in this case. This could be done by using this notation. This special notation here allows you to use a list index starting at 0 to access the different list items. So since this list index starts at 0, you would use this notation to access the first list item and this notation to access the second list item. So the first item in a list has an index of 0, the second item has an index of 1, and so on. And this index can be used with this special square bracket notation after the name of the list, so after the name of the variable or constant that contains the list, to be precise, to access the different list values. And if you would try to use an index that doesn't exist, so in this case, for example, the index 2 for a list that only has 2 elements, you would get an error. So you can't access elements that aren't there, which hopefully makes sense. Now for us, this means that we can, for example, access the first question in this list of questions by using this questions constant and then access the element with an index of 0. So in our questions screen widget here, in the build method, we can get our current question, for example, which is stored in a final variable here, since I don't plan on reassigning it inside of this build method, by accessing questions, which is this questions list here. So it's named questions here in this file, which we are importing. Hence, I can reference this list by its name here in my code in that file where I have that import. And the first question then would be accessed like this, with square brackets 0. That accesses the element with an index of 0 in that list of questions. And now we could use this current question here to output the text instead of this placeholder text. For that, we can use current question, this variable, which holds this question. And now it's important to keep in mind that our questions are objects created with help of this class constructor function. And in Dart, you can access data stored in objects by using the dot notation, which you also already saw from time to time in this course. By adding a dot after a variable or constant that contains an object, you can access the available data properties and methods that exist on this object. In this case, I could access the answers, but I can also access the text of this question. Now, this can't be const anymore here. We have to remove const because this is now derived dynamically, but at least the text style can still be set to const. And we can now, of course, also set our answers dynamically here. For that, for the first answer button, we can access current question.answers. And now answers is yet another list. So of course here we can again use this square bracket notation to access the first answer. And then for answer 2, to access the second answer by using the index 1. And that can be repeated, of course. We can do this for the third answer here, and then add a fourth answer by accessing the answer with index 3. And if you do that and save everything, you will see that you got your question here and then your different answers. And that is indeed how you can access this question data. Though that's not entirely how I want to use that data. Because, for example, with this solution, I manually created all these answer buttons, which is a lot of unnecessary code duplication. And as developers, we typically try to avoid code duplication because that then makes it easier for us to change things in the future. And it also has the disadvantage that if we had a question that had more than 4 answers, which is not the case here, but which we could of course have, then we would not have enough answer buttons here. Or we would have some empty answer buttons for questions that have less than 4 answers. So hard coding these answer buttons here is not ideal. And that's why we will output these buttons differently in the next lecture.